I'm sorry, but if she still needs the truth, I can speak for us.
The low voice cut through the boardroom's frozen silence. All eyes turned to the man who had spoken, a janitor with calloused hands, and then he continued, in Mandarin. Not broken, not hesitant, but fluent, clear, tone perfect, like a Beijing radio broadcast. The translation app slipped from Sophia Chen's fingers and clattered to the floor, and Zhang Rui, the Chinese billionaire whose empire could move markets, simply tilted her head. She listened, because in the janitor's tired eyes, she didn't see defiance. She saw something long absent from rooms like this: moral clarity. "Where did you study?" she finally asked, this time in English. "I didn't study it," Luther replied. "I lived it." Her earlier question had been flattened by the translation app. How can a global hotel claim international standards when it doesn't even understand our language? But Luther heard what was behind the words. A wound, a statement of betrayal, an echo of something he too had buried long ago. And in that room full of business minds, only the janitor understood this meeting wasn't about money. It was about justice. "I'm not here for a position," he said quietly, his voice steady now. "I'm here because silence cost me everything once. I won't let it happen again." And with that, he walked to an empty chair and took a seat right at the table. No one stopped him. A janitor, a buried secret. What connects him to one of the most powerful women in the world? Stay with us, because sometimes the man you overlook is the one holding the story you'll never forget. If this story resonated with you, let us know in the comments. Your voice matters, just like his. And don't forget to subscribe and share this with someone who needs to believe again in quiet strength. 50 feet, that's the golden rule. Vernon Pratt's voice, sharp as cut glass, echoed in the temporary briefing room. No back-of-house staff, no gardeners, no plumbers are to be seen within 50 feet of CEO Zhang Rui. Understood? The senior management team nodded in unison. Today, the Royal Key Resort wasn't a hotel. It was a billion-dollar stage, and the performance, titled Absolute Perfection, was about to begin. Anything imperfect had to be erased. "Good," Vernon said, glancing at his Swiss watch. "She lands in an hour. Back to your positions." But one person wasn't in the briefing room. On the third floor, Luther Cole was polishing a large sea-facing window. He was a ghost in the system, always present but never seen. Vernon didn't even know his name, referring to him only as the old janitor. He wasn't a flaw in the system. He was a memory the system had willfully forgotten. In the main lobby, Vernon began his final patrol, a general before a battle. "Florals," he snapped. The head of landscaping scurried over. "These orchids are they the Phalaenopsis schilleriana from Taiwan?" "Yes, sir, flown in yesterday." "Good. Ensure the room temperature doesn't exceed 75 degrees. They'll wilt." He swept past the front desk. "Maya!" Maya Kapoor, a young intern, shot to attention. "Sir?" The Mandarin greeting, again. Maya took a breath, stumbling through the phrase, "Huanying Lai Dao." "Welcome to." "Better," Vernon cut her off, not waiting for her to finish. "Remember to smile, but not too warmly. She hates insincerity." Vernon turned away, leaving Maya feeling like a talking automaton. Her eyes drifted involuntarily to the third floor, where she could see a lone figure working in silence. She knew it was Mr. Cole. Last week, he'd fixed the jammed wheel on her document cart without her even having to ask. He didn't say much. He just did. Suddenly, a low, powerful thrumming grew from the distance, overwhelming the sound of the ocean waves. Thump, thump, thump. A helicopter. In the lobby, Vernon's earpiece screeched. The frantic voice of security crackled through. "Sir, early arrival. The schedule's been moved up. She's 45 minutes ahead of schedule." "What?" Vernon roared. His composure shattered like glass. Red alert! I want everyone in position now. The rehearsed chaos began. Staff sprinted to their marks, smiles plastered on their faces. Vernon bolted to the main entrance, his hands trembling as he straightened his tie. On the third floor, Luther stopped. He didn't look at the helicopter. He just listened. He knew that sound. The sound of power arriving on its own terms. A security guard's radio squawked nearby, the voice clear. Confirming, CEO Zhang Rui's chopper has entered our airspace. ETA 2 minutes. The moment the name was spoken, Luther's hand, mid-wipe, froze. The cloth was still pressed against the glass. But all motion had ceased. Zhang Rui. A name he hadn't heard spoken aloud in 11 years. A name tied to the ashes of his former life. Flashes ignited in his mind. The smell of old paper in a Washington archive. The sharp crack of a gavel. The feeling of a cold handshake. A betrayal. The sleek black helicopter touched down on the perfectly manicured lawn. The blades slowed. The door slid open. Vernon held his breath, his smile a painful grimace. 2 figures emerged. The first was an older woman, small in stature but radiating an immense presence. Her graying hair was in a severe bun. This was Zhang Rui. Following her was a younger woman in a sharp suit, her eyes like razor blades. Sophia Chen. Her niece, the heir apparent. Vernon moved forward, readying his rehearsed welcoming speech, but Sophia stopped him with a single raised hand. She spoke quietly, her voice like ice, meant only for him. My grandmother dislikes pleasantries. Get to the point. Vernon swallowed hard, his smile vanishing. The show had gone off script before it even began. On the third floor, Luther remained motionless. He was no longer looking down at the lobby. He was staring out at the sea, but he wasn't seeing it. He was seeing a village in Sichuan through old photographs. He was seeing the faces he had failed to protect. He slowly lowered his hand, dropping the cloth into his bucket. The performance had begun, but the ghost was now in the audience. 30 minutes, Vernon's voice hissed through the earpiece. Maya Kapoor hurried down the east corridor, tablet in hand. Her task, a final check on all temporary signage. Everything seemed fine until she stopped at the sign marking the private meeting area. Pu ren bu de ru ne, nu pu bu de ru ne. Her translation app read, Staff not permitted. But her intuition, honed by 2 years of Mandarin classes, screamed that something was wrong. The character Pu Yu Pu looked archaic, almost demeaning. She pulled up a more academic dictionary. The result that flashed on screen sent a chill down her spine. Nu Pu, servant, slave. This wasn't a translation error. This was a cultural time bomb. She spun around, looking for a manager, anyone. But they were all in the main lobby. She was alone, completely helpless. And then she remembered. Last week, the break room. She'd seen Mr. Cole, the old janitor, eating lunch by himself. He was reading a newspaper, not the local one. It was a slim, almost insane hope, but it was all she had. She raced down the hall, searching for him. She found him on his knees, silently polishing the base of an elevator door, detached from the chaos. Mr. Cole, she rushed out, her voice a panicked whisper. He didn't look up immediately. He simply finished wiping one last smudge. What's wrong? He asked as if he'd been expecting her. The sign, Maya said, holding out her tablet. It uses the word for slave, not staff. Now he looked up. His eyes scanned from the tablet to the sign and back. There was no surprise, only a weary recognition. You're correct, he said, his voice low and even. It's an insult disguised as ignorance. We have to take it down, Maya said, glancing around nervously. Vernon will kill me. He'll kill you if you take it down too, Luther replied, getting to his feet. He needs someone to blame when things fall apart. Luther looked into her eyes, and for the first time, she saw something other than weariness. A sharp, strategic glint. He spoke a perfect unaccented sentence in Mandarin. Yu shi hu, zui hao defang yu jiu shi bu dong. Sometimes the best defense is to do nothing. What do you mean? Maya asked. This sign is a trap, Luther explained succinctly, his tone more like a professor's than a janitor's. But it's not for Zhang Rui. It's for people like Vernon. A test of sophistication, and he's already failed. He pointed at the sign's placement. It's hung too low. She won't see it right away, but her assistant will. Maya's earpiece crackled. 15 minutes. Everyone on deck. So we just leave it there? Maya asked, incredulous. Luther nodded. Let the system expose its own flaws. He turned back to his cart, but before he left, he paused and added one last thing. But be ready. When a small mistake like this is allowed to stand, it means there are bigger ones hiding in plain sight. And he pushed his cart away, disappearing around the corner, leaving Maya frozen in place. She looked at the sign, then down at the lobby where Vernon was barking orders. The man this entire hotel ignored had just given her a masterclass in power dynamics. She didn't take the sign down. Instead, she took a step back, hiding behind a pillar. She turned off her earpiece and began to watch. The doors to the Royal Key Resort slid open like theater curtains, and with them, the test began. Zhang Rui didn't step out. She arrived. Every inch of her was precision. A slate-gray suit tailored so sharply it could slice silk, a silk scarf in muted jade, and a posture that didn't just suggest power, it demanded it. Her hair, bound in a clean high bun, didn't move with the breeze. The woman could have walked through a storm untouched. Behind her followed Sophia Chen, her assistant and granddaughter. She was taller, younger, but moved with the same economy of motion. A steel echo. Vernon Pratt rushed forward, chin lifted, smile stretched taut. CEO Zhang, welcome to... Zhang Rui lifted a hand. Not rude, just absolute. She turned to Sophia and spoke in crisp Mandarin. Sophia raised her phone. The translation app clicked on and blurted. Mooncake with donkey tax. The silence that followed was surgical. Vernon blinked. Maya, watching from the corner, looked like she'd just swallowed a tack. A bellhop nearby froze in place. Zhang Rui didn't scowl. She exhaled, slow and quiet. Then came the question. Low, precise, cutting. This is what you call international standard? Sophia stared at the phone, mortified. There's interference. Zhang Rui didn't look at her. Her eyes were on the orchids near the entrance. Then the tiles beneath her feet. Then the gold-embossed welcome card Vernon had placed on the front desk, written in English, Korean, Japanese, but not Mandarin. I see, she said. Vernon tried to recover. We have our best Mandarin-speaking staff on standby. Who? Zhang Rui asked, eyes snapping back. Vernon hesitated, then turned frantic to Maya. Maya stepped forward, pale but composed. Huanying Lai Dao Royal Key, Zhang Zong, she offered. Zhang Rui's eyebrow barely moved. You are learning, she said flatly, switching back to Mandarin. But you're not fluent. This is not immersion. It's mimicry. Maya faltered, her throat tightening. Zhang Rui stepped past her, sweeping into the lobby like a judge entering the courtroom. Every breath of the resort's air now belonged to her. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Everyone followed. Luther Cole didn't. From the third-floor mezzanine, he stood behind a pillar, unnoticed. Watching. Sophia's voice carried as she trailed her grandmother. The boardroom's prepared. I forwarded the schedule to all parties. Media embargo in place. Zhang Rui gave the faintest nod. As the entourage moved toward the elevators, Vernon trotted beside them, still attempting small talk. Of course, our team is fully committed to adapting. Zhang Rui stopped walking. Everyone stopped with her. She was staring at a sign. Pu Ren Bu De Ru Ne, Servants not allowed inside. Her lips didn't move. Her eyes did. A slow turn toward Sophia. Sophia raised her phone. The app spoke, shakier this time. Slaves not welcome. The temperature in the lobby dropped 10 degrees. Zhang Rui looked around, slowly, as if taking stock, not of the room, but of its silence. She didn't yell. She didn't need to. She simply turned to Vernon. "Remove it." For a moment, Vernon just stared, his mind completely blank. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Then, as if jolted by an electric shock, he gestured frantically at a maintenance worker, who dashed forward to rip the sign from the wall. But the damage was done. Zhang Rui didn't say another word. She stepped into the elevator. Sophia followed. As the doors began to close, she glanced back, and her eyes met Luther's. He didn't look away. And neither did she. Upstairs in the suite-turned boardroom, preparations continued. On the ground floor, Vernon finally allowed his hands to tremble. "What just happened?" he muttered to himself. Maya didn't answer. She was still frozen near the pillar, remembering what Luther had said. "This sign is a trap." She looked up again, toward the mezzanine. But the janitor was gone. Luther Cole was wiping the marble trim along the corridor leading to the executive meeting suite. He moved methodically, quietly, like always. His body worked, but his mind wasn't there. Then he heard it. Through the slightly ajar door, the translator app buzzed. Sophia's voice stuttered out the English approximation. "This is what you call international standard?" The original Mandarin had been sharper, unforgiving. Luther froze. His hand, clutching the rag, trembled for half a second. He had heard that sentence before, 11 years ago. Washington, D.C., Conference Room 5C, Strategic Futures Institute. The lights had been dim, not for ambiance, but because no one wanted to look each other in the eye. A younger Luther stood at the far end of the table, no longer in janitor's gloves but a navy blue blazer, sleeves rolled once, revealing the edge of a worn leather watch. His shoulders were straight, his gaze direct, unafraid. His voice was calm, but resolute. "I will not sign off on this proposal," he said, placing the tablet down. "The economic model assumes full demolition of the Baishan Artisan Village. That's a 1,000-year heritage site. Do you understand what you're trading for a 10% margin gain?" Some shuffled papers. Some coughed. But one man didn't hesitate. Nathan Rusk, his top researcher, his mentee. "The revision was submitted this morning," Nathan said. "Your version was out of date, Luther." "My version?" Luther's voice darkened. Nathan tapped his own tablet. "The updated report reflects new conditions. The Chinese Municipal Board has green-lit redevelopment. It's out of our hands." "You rewrote the ethics assessment." Luther's jaw tightened. "I re-evaluated it," Nathan said, "adjusted the phrasing, made it viable. Look, this isn't about cultural preservation. It's about strategic access to the inland logistics corridor. Every other team sees it. Why don't you?" Luther turned to the room, filled with senators' aides, Pentagon analysts, silent men in darker suits. "This isn't strategy," Luther said. "It's sanitized imperialism." "Careful," someone murmured. "Are you going to side with sentimentality over scalability?" Nathan asked, his voice still polished, Ivy League crisp. "I'm siding with the truth," Luther said. "And the truth is, you can't claim global leadership if your strategy begins with erasure." Those words. That sentence. Exactly 11 years later, Zhang Rui had said them too, but hers had been a wound. His had been a warning. Back in the hallway, present-day Luther leaned against the cart. His heart was beating a little too fast. He closed his eyes. Flashback continued. Later that week, he was asked to step down. No investigation, no hearings, no press. The revised report went through. The investment approved. The Baishan village was leveled within a year. Thousands displaced. The government called it progress. And among the collateral was a small eco-luxury startup headquartered in Chengdu, Green River capital. CEO Zhang Rui, 29 at the time, a new name in sustainable tourism. She'd invested second tier in the Baishan expansion, based on the ethical recommendations she thought had been vetted. When the news broke, her name was dragged through every Weibo thread and economic blog in Asia. She lost her capital, her backers, and nearly her reputation. No one ever mentioned the American report that misrepresented the data. But Luther knew. He'd kept every article, every photograph, even the satellite images of the destruction. They were buried deep in a box under his bed. Not because he needed the evidence, because he couldn't forget the faces. In the hallway now, he opened his eyes. The corridor looked the same, but everything had changed. The system hadn't just failed. It had lied, smiled, and moved on. And Luther had become a ghost. A silent man in a uniform polishing corners no one noticed. But the words, they had come back. Not from Nathan, not from another arrogant Western voice, but from someone else who'd once believed in systems, and who'd been crushed by them too. Zhang Rui's words weren't just criticism. They were recognition. They were the echo of a shared betrayal. And suddenly, he wasn't just a janitor again. He was a witness, and, perhaps, he still had a voice. Section 401B, Vernon Pratt declared, his voice echoing across the boardroom. Under U.S. tax law, foreign subsidiaries are exempt from withholding tax. He smiled smugly, gesturing to a text-heavy slide. Zhang Rui didn't look at the slide. She looked directly at Vernon. Section 401B, she said in Mandarin, her voice cold as steel, is about retirement benefits. Not corporate tax. Boom. The first bomb had detonated. The air in the room froze. Vernon's smile shattered. Sophia Chen, the heir apparent, went pale, frantically shuffling through papers. "Ah, perhaps I misspoke on the subsection," Vernon stammered, beads of sweat forming on his forehead. Zhang Rui tilted her head. "You want to build an empire in my country, yet you can't distinguish between a pension fund and corporate tax law?" Maya, the intern seated at the far end of the table, felt her heart stop. She knew Vernon was wrong. She'd written a paper on this exact topic. She opened her mouth to salvage the moment. "Ma'am, perhaps he meant Section 881. "Silence!" Vernon roared, his panic turning to rage. "This is not the time for interns." Maya flinched, feeling the invisible slap of his words. Outside in the hallway, Luther Cole was pushing his cart past. He'd only meant to walk by. But then he heard it. Zhang Rui's voice. Sharp, powerful, and laced with a familiar pain. And then she said the words. "This is what you call international standard?" The sentence tore through 11 years of silence in Luther's chest. It wasn't a question. It was an echo. His mind spun. Washington, D.C., 2011. A stuffy room. A doctored report. He saw himself, younger, standing before a powerful committee. You can't claim global leadership if your strategy begins with erasure. And then he saw another face. The face of Ethan Rhodes, his mentee, the man who had betrayed him, the man who had stolen his truth. Luther leaned against the wall, his breathing shallow. This couldn't be a coincidence. Inside the boardroom, the crisis escalated. Sophia tried to change the subject, moving on to market projections. But Zhang Rui wasn't interested in the future. She was looking at the past. "Let's talk about the Baishan project in Sichuan," she said suddenly. The name hit Vernon like a physical blow. He'd never heard of it. "Baishan," he repeated dumbly. Sophia froze. "Grandmother, that is not on the agenda." "It is now," Zhang Rui said, her eyes sweeping across every face in the room. In 2011, an American Strategic Institute approved a development project there. They promised an ethical partnership. Instead, they leveled a 1,000-year-old heritage site. She paused, her gaze landing on Vernon. This hotel was built on the legacy of the corporation that financed that project. You are a part of that legacy. Vernon was in total meltdown. He knew nothing about this. Outside, Luther felt a crushing weight on his chest. She knows. Somehow, she knows. He looked through the glass panel on the door. He saw the chaos. He saw Vernon dissolving. He saw Sophia trying to regain control. And then he saw Maya. She wasn't looking at anyone in the room. Her eyes were fixed on the hallway, directly at him. There was no pity in her gaze, no fear, only a silent question. Do you know what's happening? And in that instant, Luther realized. For 11 years he had thought of himself as a ghost, a victim. He was wrong. He wasn't the only victim. His silence hadn't just buried his own truth. It had allowed a lie to live, a lie that had destroyed others, like Zhang Rui, like the villagers of Baishan. And now, that same system was about to devour another innocent. Maya. The memory of his late wife flashed in his mind. Language can carry love, Luther, but silence only carries regret. He looked down at his calloused hands, a janitor's hands, but they had once been the hands of a teacher, a man who fought for the truth. He straightened his back. The stoop of 11 years of burdens vanished, replaced by the posture of a professor, of a fighter. He walked toward the door. Each step no longer belonged to a ghost. They belonged to a man reclaiming his soul. His pulse pounded, not with fear, but with clarity. He would not let silence win. Not this time. His hand closed around the cold brass handle, and he opened the door. The door opened. "Stop! This is a closed meeting!" Vernon Pratt's voice cracked like a whip, panic and fury warring in his eyes as the janitor stepped across the threshold. But Luther Cole didn't stop. He didn't even glance at Vernon. His cheap janitor's shoes made no sound on the marble floor as he entered, a ghost finally deciding to take form. His gaze, steady, unwavering, was fixed on the only person in the room who mattered. Zhang Rui. Sophia Chen shot to her feet instinctively, ready to call security. Maya held her breath, her hands clenched under the table. Vernon gawked. "Ma'am, this man is—" Zhang cut him off with a glance that could publicly gut a man and still look elegant. Before anyone else could react, Luther spoke, not in English. "Pardon me," he said in Mandarin, his voice low and clear, cutting through the chaos, "but if the lady still requires the truth, I can help." That language. From this man. In this room. It was like a stray note in a loud symphony, forcing everything else into silence. Vernon stood frozen, confused. Sophia was speechless, her sharp eyes narrowing as she assessed the situation. She had never encountered a variable like this. But Zhang Rui didn't look confused at all. She looked like a go-master who had just watched her opponent make an unexpected but fascinating move. The annoyance on her face dissolved, replaced by sharp, cold curiosity. She wasn't looking at a janitor. She was looking at an enigma. She raised a single hand, a small but powerful gesture, silencing Vernon once more. Then she looked directly at Luther. She didn't ask who he was. She didn't ask why he was here. She gave a single, short command that was both an invitation and a challenge. "Speak," she said in English, her voice clear and devoid of emotion. One word, but it changed all the rules in the room. It had just empowered the most invisible man. Luther gave a slight nod, a silent acknowledgement between two people who understood the weight of words. Vernon looked as if his world had been turned upside down. The stage now belonged to the janitor, and no one in the room, not even Sophia, who was always 3 moves ahead, could have predicted what he was about to say. Zhang Rui folded her hands. "Answer 3 questions." Luther nodded once, his stance relaxed, but his eyes sharp, already scanning the battlefield he'd just stepped into. She began in Mandarin, her tone clipped and precise. What is the difference between Zeren Yushen Gongxi and Gu Fen Yushen Gongxi? Luther didn't blink. He replied smoothly, also in Mandarin. Zeren Yushen Gongsi refers to a limited liability company, often privately held, with member-based ownership. Gu Fen Yushen Gongxi, by contrast, is a joint stock company, typically public. It is accountable to shareholders. The difference isn't legal, it's philosophical. One is built on control, the other on trust. The room was silent. The phrasing was not just accurate, it was elegant. Zhang didn't react. She moved on. Second, explain the concept of face, mianzi, in negotiation. Mianzi, Luther began, still in Mandarin, is not flattery, nor is it fear. It is the invisible currency of respect. You can give it, borrow it, destroy it, or be buried by its absence. A skilled negotiator offers face without losing ground. An arrogant one only seeks to take it, and ends up alone. Sophia's eyes narrowed. Third question. Zhang's voice sharpened slightly. And how should a foreign investor treat a village elder who opposes land development on ancestral ground? Luther didn't hesitate. With tea, he said. 3 cups, not 2 or 1. The first to listen, the second to acknowledge, the third to ask permission. Then he added, with a wry note, and if you're not willing to ask permission, you shouldn't be there at all. The words hung in the air like incense. Zhang Rui didn't speak, but something shifted in her eyes. A glint of recognition, even memory. Sophia broke the silence. Well, she said, smiling tightly, I'm sure Google teaches anyone these days. It was a dig, dismissive, wrapped in civility. But Luther didn't rise to it. He simply turned to her and asked in crisp English, And where did you study? Columbia, she replied, straightening slightly. Luther nodded once, then delivered the blow. I taught at Tsinghua. Silence. You could hear the breath suck out of the room. Even Zhang Rui tilted her head just slightly. Sophia's posture stiffened. Maya's jaw fell open. Vernon didn't understand what Tsinghua was, but he could tell from the others that something seismic had occurred. Luther's voice remained gentle. Department of Global Policy. Guest lecturer for 4 years. I didn't just visit China. I lived its questions. Zhang Rui finally spoke. Why did you stop? Luther met her gaze. Because one of those questions betrayed me. The room remained still. He had answered the challenge, not just linguistically, culturally, spiritually. Zhang Rui leaned back, her expression unreadable. She glanced at Sophia, who didn't speak. Continue, Zhang said, her voice now quieter. But the command was still absolute. Maya sat still in her seat, trying not to cry. A janitor? Her janitor? And now, the only person in the room who could speak Zhang Rui's language, not just the words, but the weight behind them. Luther looked around the room. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't triumphant. He was patient, because he knew what came next. The test was no longer his, it was theirs, and none of them, especially not Sophia, had expected this opening blow to come from someone holding a mop just 20 minutes earlier. He hadn't raised his voice, he hadn't shown credentials, but in 3 sentences, he had redrawn the power map in that room. And Zhang Rui? She had noticed. Everyone had. The silence that followed the words, I taught at Tsinghua, was thick and heavy, like the air before a storm. Vernon didn't understand, but he could feel the shift in power. Maya was nearly breathless, her eyes wide with astonishment. But Sophia Chen was not one to be easily defeated. The initial shock quickly gave way to a cold, calculated skepticism. She had been raised to trust what was verifiable: data, records, resumes. A story, no matter how compelling, was still just a story. She didn't falter. Instead, she did what she did best. She went on the attack. With a terrifying calm, she unlocked her tablet. Her fingers flew across the screen with the speed and precision of a hacker. She accessed the Royal Key's internal HR portal, for which she'd been granted temporary credentials. A few seconds later, a file appeared. She turned the screen for the entire room to see, her voice now dripping with sharp-edged sarcasm. "Very impressive, Mr. Cole," she began, her tone laced with contempt. "A truly wonderful story. However, according to the official, signed and verified records of the Royal Key Resort," she paused for effect. "You are Luther Cole. High school graduate, no university degrees listed, 11 years of experience. In sanitation services across 3 different properties before your arrival here." She looked up, her gaze a drill boring straight into Luther. "So, we have a problem here," she continued, her voice now addressed to her grandmother, but her eyes still locked on Luther. "What are we supposed to believe, grandmother? A fairy tale about a long-lost professor? Or the actual, verifiable data right in front of us?" It was a public assault. A challenge. Sophia wasn't just trying to expose Luther. She was trying to pull the game back onto her home turf, a world of numbers and paper trails where stories of dignity and ethics had no place. She was betting that in a fight between a bland HR file and an extraordinary story, power would always side with what was written on paper. Vernon let out a quiet sigh of relief, looking at Sophia with gratitude. Finally, someone was taking back control. Maya, however, felt a chill run down her spine. She saw the trap Sophia was laying with perfect clarity. But Luther didn't look flustered. He didn't look at the tablet. He didn't even look at Sophia. He only looked at Zhang Rui, as if they were the only 2 people in the room. His expression showed no defensiveness, only a deep, profound sadness, as if he had known this attack was coming, as if he had been living with it for 11 years. And he waited to see which the most powerful woman in the room would choose to believe. The man, or the system. The silence after Sophia's accusation was thick. Her tablet's screen remained illuminated, displaying the words, "Janitor." No college degree. Like a verdict. Luther didn't look at it. He looked directly at Zhang Rui, who still hadn't said a word. "That file," Luther said, his voice low and even. "It isn't wrong. It's who I am now." Sophia smirked, a flicker of victory in her eyes. "But it's not who I was," Luther continued, and he began to walk slowly, deliberately toward the conference table. Each step was intentional, causing Vernon to instinctively lean back in his chair. He stopped when he was level with Sophia. He didn't look at her, but at her tablet. "Search a name," he said. "Ethan Rhodes, Strategic Futures Institute." Sophia frowned, but curiosity won out over pride. She typed the name into the search bar. A flood of results appeared: articles, interviews, the gleaming LinkedIn profile of a successful executive. "He was my mentee," Luther said, "the man who took my signature and attached it to a lie." Sophia's eyes scanned the screen. She read about Rhodes' rapid promotions, his successes. But then she stopped on an old article from a defunct academic blog. The headline, "Ethical Controversies Swirl Around Baishan Development Project." "The Baishan Project," Zhang Rui said, her voice betraying a flicker of emotion for the first time. It wasn't a question. It was a recognition. Luther nodded. "You were there." Sophia kept reading. She saw Luther's name mentioned as the report's lead who was quietly dismissed. She saw accusations of a hidden clause. She saw the numbers of displaced families. This can't be," Sophia murmured, her data-driven worldview beginning to fracture. "No," Luther said, "it couldn't be, but it was, and the system made sure the only records left were of Ethan Rhodes's success and my disappearance. He turned to Zhang Rui, who had been watching all of this in silence. The system is very good at erasure, Madam Zhang. It erases villages. It erases truths. It erases people. He paused, and now he delivered the final blow. But there was one name it couldn't completely erase, a small startup that sued until the very end, a name that was crushed but not forgotten. Everyone in the room held their breath. Luther looked directly into Zhang Rui's eyes. "Search one more name, Ms. Chen," he said to Sophia, but his gaze never left Zhang Rui. "Fengji Capital." Sophia typed in the name, and the screen filled with the results. The history of a collapsed company, articles about a failed lawsuit, and at the bottom of the page, under Founder, Zhang Rui. Click. The tablet slipped from Sophia's hand and fell flat on the table. Absolute silence. Vernon looked like he'd just seen a ghost. Maya raised a hand to her mouth. Zhang Rui didn't move. She just closed her eyes, as if an old wound had just been ripped open. The words of a stranger in the hall, the accusation from her own granddaughter, and now the name of her own lost beginning. Everything suddenly connected into a single, tragic picture. She opened her eyes. The coldness of a CEO was gone, replaced by the weariness of a survivor. "You were there," she said softly. "I was," Luther confirmed, "and I was silent. Until today." He offered no excuses. He asked for no forgiveness. He simply presented the truth, raw and painful. That truth no longer belonged to just him or just her. It hung in the middle of the room, an indictment of everyone who had ever chosen to believe in files instead of people. Luther took a step back, retreating to the shadows by the door. His part was done. The power map had been redrawn, and now it was the Queen's move. No one spoke. The name, Fengji Capital, still lingered in the air like smoke after a fire. Sophia stood frozen, her hand hovering above the fallen tablet. Vernon had shrunk into his chair, trying to become invisible. Maya looked between them, unsure if she had just witnessed a reckoning or a collapse. And Zhang Rui still hadn't moved. Her eyes were locked on the screen for what felt like a full minute, but no one dared interrupt the silence, not even Luther. Then, quietly, deliberately, she closed the tablet's cover. The sound was soft, but it felt like a gavel. She straightened her back, then slowly pushed her chair back with a grace that made even the air feel still. The scraping sound of wood against marble echoed like thunder in the silence. Every eye in the room turned to her. Vernon began to rise, trying to salvage the moment. "Ma'am, if I may, just—" Zhang raised her hand. He froze mid-sentence. She didn't look at him. She didn't look at Sophia. She looked at no one in particular, yet somehow everyone at once. Her voice, when it came, was like glass, cold, clear, and sharp enough to cut. "This meeting is over. I will need to reconsider my investment." 8 words, no shouting, no finger-pointing, no accusations. But it was the most devastating verdict she could deliver. Sophia's mouth opened, then closed again. Her mind raced to find a counterplay. There was none. Vernon turned pale. His career had just been pushed off a cliff and there was nothing to grab on the way down. Zhang Rui turned away from the table. She walked toward the door. Not fast, not slow, just inevitable. And as she passed Luther, standing quietly by the exit, she didn't say a word. She simply paused for a half-second, long enough to acknowledge his presence, long enough to remind everyone in the room that she had heard him. Then she left. The door closed behind her with a soft click, and with it the room's oxygen seemed to vanish. What remained was the aftermath. Sophia stared at the blank screen of her tablet, her expression unreadable. Vernon finally slumped forward, a man watching his empire crack underfoot. Across the room, Maya exhaled, only now realizing she'd been holding her breath. Luther hadn't moved. He didn't need to. The most powerful person in the room had walked away. And the second most powerful? She hadn't won, but for the first time in her life, she had nothing left to say. A phone buzzed softly on the table. No one checked it. A breeze rattled the blinds. Still no one moved. Finally, Maya stood. She gathered her notepad, tucking it under her arm like it was armor. She walked out the door, not looking back. Behind her, Vernon whispered something, barely audible. What the hell just happened? But no one answered, because everyone already knew. The soft click of the closing door was like the starting pistol for Vernon Pratt's rage. His face, a mask of practiced calm just moments ago, contorted into a snarl. He lunged across the room, not at the door Zhang Rui had just exited, but at the man who remained. "You!" he spat, his finger jabbing the air inches from Luther's face. "You're done. Get your things. Security is on its way." Luther didn't react. He simply stood there, a rock in the middle of a storm, his expression unreadable. But before Vernon could reach for his phone, a single word cut through the air. No. It wasn't loud, it wasn't angry. It was cold, sharp, and it came from Sophia Chen. She hadn't moved from her chair. Her face was pale, her eyes still fixed on the blank screen of her tablet, but the word hung in the air with absolute authority. Vernon spun around, incredulous. "What did you say?" Sophia slowly lifted her gaze. The arrogant prodigy was gone. In her place was something new, something calculating and dangerous. "Right now," she said, her voice barely a whisper but carrying across the silent room, "that man is the only thing holding this deal together. He is the loose thread she might pull on to come back." Vern scoffed. "He's a janitor who just cost us millions." "And if you fire him 5 minutes after she walks out," Sophia countered, her logic like a series of surgical cuts. "What message does that send? It's not a dismissal. It's a cover-up. You'll be proving him right." The blood drained from Vernon's face. He had been so blinded by rage, he hadn't seen the trap. Firing Luther wasn't an act of power. It was an admission of guilt. He looked around desperately for an ally. The legal team stared at their notepads. The other managers avoided his gaze. Maya, the intern, looked at him with undisguised contempt. In the space of 10 minutes, Vernon Pratt had lost the room. He was a king without a kingdom. He deflated, the fury replaced by a pathetic whimper. "So, what are we supposed to do? Just let him walk away?" "Yes," Sophia said. And so they did. Luther turned. He didn't say goodbye. He didn't offer a final, knowing glance. He simply walked out of the room he had just conquered. No security guards. No angry shouts. Just the soft, rhythmic sound of his worn-out shoes on the marble floor. He passed Maya in the hallway. He didn't speak, but he gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. It was a transfer of responsibility. A passing of the torch. He walked past the grand windows, past the expensive art, past all the symbols of a world that had tried to erase him. None of it could touch him now. He didn't look back. The man who had entered the meeting as a ghost left as a king. And behind him, in the silent, shattered boardroom, a new power struggle had just begun. The morning air was thick with salt and silence. Waves slapped gently against the shore, rhythmically erasing footprints from the sand, as if even nature preferred secrets washed clean. Luther stood by the wooden fence overlooking the water, the wind tugging at his sleeves. For the first time in years, he had no uniform, just a quiet, ordinary jacket. It felt unfamiliar, almost undeserved. Then he heard the footsteps. He didn't turn around. He didn't have to. Zhang Rui came to stand beside him, not too close, not too far. The sea stretched before them like an unsaid truth neither of them was ready to name. They stood in silence for a long moment. It wasn't awkward. It was heavy. "I hate the ocean," Zhang said finally, her tone dry but hollow. Too loud. Too unpredictable. Luther almost smiled. My wife loved it. Said the ocean never hides its nature. What you see is what you get. Then she was luckier than either of us. Another pause. Zhang's voice lowered. You knew who I was, didn't you? The moment I walked into that room. Luther nodded. Not at first. But when you mentioned Bai Shan, I remembered. The way you fought, the lawsuits, the public letters. You were younger then, angrier. I was devastated, she corrected. That company was all I had, and Bai Shan was the grave it was buried in. She turned to look at him now. And yet, you said nothing. You knew the truth all along. Luther's hands gripped the railing. I did. Why? He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked at the horizon. They took my name, he said at last. Not literally, but everything tied to it. My work, my credibility, my identity, was scrubbed clean, like I had never existed. He exhaled slowly. And I was foolish enough to believe that meant they'd taken my voice too. Zhang said nothing. But yesterday, Luther continued, I watched it happen again. Not to me. To someone else. That girl, Maya. She was about to be sacrificed to the same machine. And I realized, silence doesn't just protect the system. It feeds it. Zhang's eyes darkened. So, you spoke up. No, Luther said quietly. I showed up. The waves hit harder now, as if echoing that choice. Zhang looked down at the sand. Do you know what they said about me when Fengji Capital failed? I read some of it, Luther replied. Enough to know they blamed you. Not the architects, not the financiers. You. They said I was naive, that I didn't do due diligence, that I was just another ambitious woman who played a man's game and lost. She laughed bitterly. I buried that version of myself a long time ago. And replaced her with the woman who walked into that boardroom yesterday, Luther said. She turned sharply. You disapprove? No, he said. I recognize her. For a moment, the sea was the only thing that spoke between them. Then Zhang asked, Do you regret it? Breaking your silence? Luther took his time with the answer. I regret waiting this long. Zhang looked away, her jaw tightening. The system we live in, it's built to forget people like you. It records what's useful, deletes what's inconvenient. And it teaches people like you to survive by becoming unrecognizable. They locked eyes. No anger, no blame. Only two survivors of the same storm, finally seeing the scars on each other's skin. I don't know if you believe me, Luther said, but I never expected to speak again. That girl, Maya, she reminded me of someone I used to be responsible for. A student. He betrayed me, sold a lie I refused to sign, and the system rewarded him. Zhang's lips pressed into a thin line. Ethan Rhodes, she said. You knew. I made a deal with him 5 years ago. He runs one of the compliance firms my company once used. He told me once, over dinner, that he used to have a brilliant mentor. Said he learned 2 things from him, how to write the truth and how to hide it. Luther looked down. I failed him. Or maybe I created him. Zhang shook her head. Number. The system did. Another gust of wind swept through, pushing Zhang's long coat behind her like a banner. I need time, she said. This deal. It may never go through. I understand. But if it does, she added, this story will not be swept under the rug. Not again. Luther turned to her. And if it doesn't? Zhang's eyes glinted like steel beneath the early sun. Then I'll find another battlefield. But this time, I'll bring my own historians. They stood again in silence. Then, almost as an afterthought, Zhang asked, What do you want, Mr. Cole? Luther blinked. What I want? For yourself. He thought for a long moment. I want someone to walk into a room one day, he said slowly, and see a man cleaning the floor, and not assume that's all he ever was. Zhang considered this. Then she nodded, once. No promises, no apologies, but a mutual understanding. She turned to leave. Luther stayed watching the waves consume footprint after footprint. But for the first time in years, he didn't feel like one of them. He had left his mark, and this time, the tide wouldn't take it away. The boardroom at Royal Key was silent. Again. But this time, there was no Zhang Rui seated at the head of the table. No janitor by the door. Just executives, legal counsel, and shattered confidence hanging in the air like the dust from a collapsed empire. Vernon Pratt sat stiffly, a fresh coffee untouched in front of him. His tie was perfectly knotted, but his hands trembled. Sophia Chen leaned back in her chair, arms crossed, tablet in hand. Her face was unreadable. Then the door creaked open, and the head of legal stepped in, holding a printed letter. ZH International's formal reply just came in, he announced, voice clipped. No one exhaled. The man handed the document to Sophia first. She scanned the top, her eyes narrowing. This is not a negotiation, she murmured. Vernon leaned forward. What does it say? Sophia didn't answer immediately. She kept reading. Then, without looking up, she placed the paper flat in the center of the table. Everyone gathered around. 2 bullet points. Simple. 1. Full executive restructuring of Royal Key Resorts prior to any further financial release. 2. Immediate creation of the position. Chief Advisor for Intercultural Strategic Integrity. Nominee, Mr. Luther Cole. The room exploded. What the hell does that mean? They want us to give a janitor a board-level title. This is extortion. Sophia held up a hand. The room fell quiet again. This isn't extortion, she said coolly. It's leverage, and it's brilliant. Vernon stared at the paper like it was a bomb. She can't do this. She already has, Sophia said. He looked at her, eyes wild. You're not seriously considering this. Sophia turned to face him directly. You still think this is about pride. It's not. It's about trust. Zhang Rui doesn't want our numbers anymore. She wants evidence of transformation, tangible, irreversible change. She wants to humiliate us. No, Sophia corrected. She wants to ensure what happened in Baishan, and to Luther, never happens again. And she's using capital to do it. The CFO spoke up for the first time. If we lose this investment, we lose 3 upcoming developments across Southeast Asia. We won't recover from that. And if we fire Luther or refuse this, Vernon shot back. We're not just refusing him, the CFO replied. We're refusing Zhang Rui, and worse, we're refusing change. Vernon looked around. No one was backing him. Sophia tapped the second bullet point again. You don't see it yet, do you? See what? She didn't just offer him a role. She created a new one that never existed before, a role that forces us to reckon with the damage we've normalized. She didn't just rewrite the power structure. She looked up, eyes gleaming. She rewrote the language. Silence. It wasn't just an ultimatum. It was a blueprint. Sophia pushed the letter closer to Vernon. You can either step aside or be voted out. But either way, this is happening. Vernon slumped back, the fight bleeding out of him. And Sophia? She didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She simply turned to the legal team. Draft the restructure plan. Make it public. By tomorrow. Someone asked, what about Mr. Cole? Sophia finally allowed herself the smallest of smiles. I'll call him. The corner office looked strangely small without the plaques. Stacks of papers were already boxed. Vernon Pratt stood over his desk, gently wrapping a glass award in bubble wrap, the kind no one remembered giving him. His suit jacket hung limp on the back of a chair, as if it too had resigned. Outside the glass walls, the company buzzed like nothing had changed. But inside, everything had. He paused, picked up a silver pen with his initials on it, and slipped it quietly into his pocket. Then, with one final glance around, he closed the box. And just like that, Vernon Pratt, once the face of Royal Key's Western Division, walked out carrying his own legacy in a cardboard coffin. 2 floors down, the conference room wasn't sterile anymore. Light poured in from the floor-to-ceiling windows. Chairs had been rearranged, papers scattered, not in chaos, but in collaboration. Luther Cole sat at the far end, not in a janitor's uniform, but in a simple dark shirt, sleeves rolled. In front of him, a dry erase board filled with phrases like qualitative equity metrics and invisible labor pathways. He wasn't lecturing. He was listening. Across from him, Sophia Chen took notes with a quiet diligence that would have been unthinkable weeks ago. Gone was the arrogance, the need to win. What remained was clarity and humility. "I don't want this to be cosmetic," she said, eyes meeting his. "This new audit, it has to go deeper than numbers. We need to measure what our system refuses to count." Luther leaned back. "And you want to call it what?" "Human capital audit," Sophia said. "But not the usual kind. Not just salaries or hours logged. I want to track mentorship, cultural fluency, moral resistance, the soft things that keep the hard systems from collapsing." Luther smiled faintly. "You're asking for a soul ledger." Sophia nodded. "Yes, and I need your help building it." He didn't answer right away. Instead, he turned to the empty chair beside her. "I asked Maya to join us," he said. Sophia blinked. "Maya? The intern?" "She saw what others refused to see," Luther said. "She stood up when she had nothing to gain. That kind of instinct, it can't be trained, only trusted." As if on cue, Maya stepped into the room holding a tablet and a thermos. She paused in the doorway, unsure. Sophia stood. "You're late," she said. Maya blushed. "Sorry, Good," Sophia cut in, smiling slightly. "Now you owe us 2 brilliant ideas instead of 1. Maya grinned, sliding into the seat. It was subtle, but real. A new table, a new tone, a new beginning. Later that evening, the last light spilled across the rooftop terrace where Luther stood alone, looking over the city. The skyline hadn't changed, but he had. From behind, footsteps approached. Sophia joined him, holding a folder. "We're finalizing the restructure plan," she said. "Legal wants to know what title you prefer." Luther chuckled softly. "I never cared about titles." Sophia looked at him. "Then pick the one that means something." He opened the folder. Chief Advisor for Intercultural Strategic Integrity. It wasn't about power. It was about design. He closed the folder, nodding once. "Let's build something worth surviving." Downstairs, the cleaning crew began their shift. But upstairs, for the first time in a long time, the system wasn't just cleaning house. It was learning to rebuild. The office was quiet. Not the sterile silence of power, but the gentle kind, like the hush of early morning before the world stirs. Luther Cole sat at his new desk. No gold nameplate, no sprawling city view. Just clean wood, soft light, and a stack of proposals waiting to be read with care. On one shelf, a bamboo pen rested atop a leather-bound journal. A silent keepsake. A promise kept. He sipped lukewarm tea, eyes scanning the horizon through the open window. The sea murmured faintly in the distance. The world hadn't changed, but something had. A knock at the door. Luther looked up. A young man, early 20s, calloused hands, uniform a little too big, stood in the doorway holding a clipboard and nervous hope. "Mr. Cole?" the boy asked. "I was told you're head of the new advisory unit?" Luther nodded. "That's what the sign says." The boy shifted his weight. I studied business. Only got through 2 years before. Well, life happened. Been on maintenance crew since. But I heard—" his voice faltered. "I heard you give chances." Luther gestured to the empty chair across from him. The boy stepped in, sat cautiously like the furniture might reject him. For a moment they just looked at each other, two men, two timelines, colliding at the crossroad of opportunity. Then Luther spoke. "You want a role here?" he asked. The boy nodded. "Yes, sir. I know I don't have credentials, but I learn fast. And I care." Luther leaned forward, clasping his hands. "Son," he said gently, "before we talk about what you can do." He paused. "Tell me something." The boy straightened. Luther's voice was soft, but it carried. "What do you believe in?" The question hung in the air. Not a test, not a trick, an invitation. The boy didn't answer right away. He looked down at his hands, then back at the man in front of him. "I believe people deserve to be seen," he said, "not just for what they clean or where they came from, but who they are when no one's watching." Luther smiled, the same smile he once gave to Maya, to Zhang Rui, to himself in the mirror, after 11 years of silence. He reached into his drawer, pulled out a single sheet of paper, and slid it across the table. "Then maybe," he said, "you're exactly who we need." The boy took it with shaking hands. Outside, the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the marble halls Luther had once swept. Now he was building something new inside them. Not a system of titles, but a network of belief. A few minutes later, the boy left, walking a little taller than before. Luther watched him go, and for the first time in a very long time, he closed his eyes and breathed easy. "Before we say goodbye, we'd love to know, where are you watching from? Is it a quiet morning with a warm cup of coffee, or a late night where stories like this keep you company? Let us know in the comments. We read everyone with gratitude. And if this story touched your heart, please consider subscribing to the channel, not just to hear more stories like this, but to be part of a community that still believes in kindness, healing, and second chances. Thank you for spending your time with us today. Wherever you are, we hope you carry this story with you, and remember, sometimes the miracle doesn't knock on your door. It waits quietly until you're ready to open your heart. Take care, and we'll see you in the next story.